Reading Baby Sook's sermon in the clearing from Toni Morrison's book Beloved was the first time a religious space gave me permission. It gave me permission to refuse false narratives about who I was. I was allowed, for the first time, to let my lived experience be a trustworthy litmus test for what was true. I began to let my own intuition be the first source I looked to for guidance instead of outsourcing it to someone else. I'm Tamese Spencer Helms, and this is Black Modern Mystic. In this episode, we talk about the resurrection technology of womanism and womanist theology with two scholars, Dr. Amey Victoria Adkins Jones and Dr. Gary Green, who have both been deeply impacted and inspired by this field of study and scholarship.
Theology in the United States, coming from, sort of a European set of traditions that, like many of our disciplines, get primacy, or sort of seen as like the highest good, the most civilized, the classics, right? These are white men. And so theology has been dominated not only by white male voices and interpretations, but also an image of Jesus that is very much so blonde-haired and blue-eyed. And what happened in theology is that once James Cone really sort of broke ground in thinking about what became, Black Liberation Theology. Once Cone, established this sort of incredible affirmation that, Jesus is Black. Jesus is aligned with the oppressed. Jesus is aligned with those who are coming to the world from the underside. Jesus is aligned with those who are made invisible or coerced or forced into these different realities that don't afford people the fullness of their humanity, don't afford them their dignity. So in this world, in the United States, if we were looking for Jesus, where are you? Like, what do you mean? Where were you? When did I not feed you? When did I not see you? When did I not give you drink? That would be the situation of Black folks in the U.S. But even in establishing that, all of us have limitations and blind spots that emerge when that we need community for. Iron sharpens iron. And so our incredible womanist for mothers, and at this point, there are some womanish aligned male identified folks as well. As those categories have expanded and welcomed others in, we had incredible folks like Katie Cannon, incredible folks like Dolores Williams, incredible folks like Jacqueline Grant, who said, well, wait a minute. All of this question and beautiful thought about the Blackness of Jesus is also assuming a kind of male inheritance in the world. That there are limitations to when we say Black, and honestly, when we frequently say Black man, the Black man this, well, what does that mean for Black women? So we were getting it from the direction of having racial groundbreaking conversations, but it also was happening and has happened over, long sets of time, but was recognized that the wave of feminist theology was predominated by white women. And so the questions of race, the questions of what we would now call intersectionality, the questions of inhabiting multiple identities were not being raised. And Black women brought this to the fore and said, hey, if we're going to take theology seriously, if we're going to take freedom seriously, if we're going to take notions of liberation seriously, then we have to take the lived experiences, perspectives, and inferences and production of Black women seriously. So womanist theology arises not only as a response, right? There's a level of refusal that says this isn't enough to make sense of and account for the desires we have in the world. But it is also that kind of clearing. It's not just, I'm always adamant to say, womanist theology doesn't arise just in response to something. You didn't get it right, or no, it's also a deeply creative exercise in what else is possible for us and in the world. And so in that sense, I love imagining and thinking about the spaces of womanist theology, and then the spaces of the ways that it develops, right? And continues to ask questions. Well, what does it mean to be a woman? Like, what are these terms? Like, what are we discussing as it evolves? Those kinds of conversations are in and of themselves clearings. In the clearing, you can find new ways to love, and not only new ways just to love yourself, but critically to love one another. Let the children come. Let the women come. Let the grown men come. Everyone can come to these spaces because we need each other. Our survival is rooted in collectivity. And so those are some of the ideals and expressions of womanist theology that I love. It reminds me very much, and this emerged on a slightly different trajectory, but the Combahee Collective, Combahee River Collective's notion that, hey, we have to get free, and you have to pay attention to Black women, because if Black women were free, that would mean all of us were free. And so womanist theology is thinking about liberation that takes seriously not only Black women and community. And again, it starts as a United States-based imaginary and the legacy and history of enslavement here, but that has broadened and expanded to what a global sense of Blackness and identity has meant and continues to mean in our world today. But there is something deeply rooted in refusing the temptation to individuality, and refusing the temptation of me getting mine and you not getting yours. Again, like, none of us are free unless all of us are free. And so I love that womanist theology does that, has embarked upon that, has done that in a way that has held to account the whiteness of theology, the maleness of theology, even the heteronormativity of theology, right? The capitalism of our theologies, and held that to account, but has been rooted in an interrogation and in a journey of love for oneself, love for one another, and really the sense of love for all creation.
Like Dr. Amey Victoria said, even male-identified people can be inspired and impacted by womanist theology. Dr. Gary Green is one of those people, one of my favorite teachers on womanist theology. He's about to talk to us about the ways the womanists taught him about bearing divinity in the body.
Being invited to think about womanism from the perspective of an expert, I'm still a student of womanism. It very much so myself, and so we'll talk about, of course, Jacqueline Grant, Dolores Williams, Katie Cannon, as those first womanist thinkers who are, and also Africana womanism, but these are the first thinkers who are creating space and telling stories and doing theology from the place of Black women's religious experiences. And I would say also embodied experiences, the lives that Black women actually live as the starting point and center of doing theological reflection. And so then you think of this next wave or this widening with second wave womanism, at least the way that I understand it. It's less of a first or initial articulation, or if we were thinking about it in terms of neuroscience, right? The first signal being sent down a new pathway. But now that pathway begins to widen, those dendrites begin to thicken a little bit, and now the signal can go a little faster. What that looks like, or at least what it looked like historically and culturally, is now you've got a kind of disciplinary distinction. There's a discipline called womanism, or a discourse becomes expected, right? It might have still been rare, and it might have not, at any given institution probably didn't have a whole lot of funding behind it, because you know how it goes. But this is when the conversation begins to take hold, and you start to see programs pop up in different places on womanism, or even the fact that you can study something called womanist theology.
One of my favorite aspects of being in Dr. Green's courses was thinking about womanism in terms of widening and in terms of waves. I asked him to dive a little bit deeper into what were some of the ways and who were some of the womanists who were responsible for them.
Some of the thinkers that come to mind when I think of the second wave are, of course, Kelly Brown Douglas, Emily Towns. Oh goodness, I mean the list goes on, but that's what's distinct in my recollection of womanism as far as second wave. Third wave womanism, which Monica Coleman, and I reference Monica Coleman specifically because she's one of my foremothers, and so are some others that I will name. But she reflects specifically on third wave womanism in Ain't I a Womanist Too? And talks about how in second wave womanism, the way that, in my words, Black women had to establish themselves and establish this discourse as a discourse that is honored by the Academy, they had to play a game. And, a lot of my work has to do with the games that we have to play. But they had to play a game and play by certain disciplinary institutional rules to garner the legitimacy of the discourse. But one of the ways that third wave womanists reflect on that is that it's not just Black women's experience or embodiment, but that womanist theology is also a method, a way of looking at life. And there's a widening invitation for people who might not be Black women or might not be cis Black women to call themselves womanist as well. And that's still an ongoing debate. But there's a widening and a more inclusive impulse among third wave womanists to say that we need to really not take for granted the category Black, not take for granted the category woman. And so it's kind of this embrace of postmodernism, and to say, we need to think more critically and complexly about how even we use these terms.
This conversation made me want to ask Dr. Amey Victoria about Dolores Williams in particular, because her work in the book Sisters in the Wilderness had a profound effect upon me in the same way it affected Dr. Green. Here is what Dr. Amey Victoria Adkins Jones had to say about Dolores Williams.
Incredible theologian, also incredible biblical scholar. She centers Hagar, the story between Hagar, Sarah, and Abram, and centers that question of asking what happens, one, when we try to make God in our image, then not, but what happens when certain folks are left vulnerable, certain folks with wombs are left vulnerable. Certain birthing people are left vulnerable. Those who are enslaved or made concubine, literally or metaphorically made vulnerable. Those who reflect a Black and white mistress and enslaved dynamic. What happens? And what happens when even the person who is seen to be despised, who is thrown out, cast out, what happens when Hagar finds herself in a wilderness, has left her baby because she can't bear to see this baby starve and die? We've gotten too used to seeing babies starving and thirsting and dying. Can't bear to witness this death, calls on God, and God intervenes. God provides, and she becomes the one who names God. That kind of speaking, that power of language, that power of interaction, the power of being seen, naming God as Elroy, someone who sees me, that level of visibility, I would argue, is missing in our world. And it was missing for quite some time in theology, as it has dominated, right? Like we have cosmologies and theologies that have asked these kinds of questions, but they're often demonized, and particularly aspects and inheritances of Africana religious traditions. But even in Christianity, even in terms of, we just having some good Black church folks going on, we inherited some really problematic theologies that said that in order to be holy, or the best way to be humble and to holy, was to denigrate oneself. And so there's a question in womanist theology that says, well, wait a minute, what happened to this notion? We can talk about original sin or falling away or how we want to think about sin or evil or injustice in the world. But also there's something that says that we were created not just good, but very good. And what happens when we are operating out of an ethic of love, out of an ethic of care, out of an ethic of refusal of the narratives that would deny us access or have us think that we are less than? What happens if we shift that narrative? And what happens when we say not only what we aren't, I'm not worthy, I'm not holy, I'm not, I'm not. What happens when we shift that says, no, I am called by God. I am seen by God. I am loved by God. What happens when we love our flesh, this here flesh? And I think that set of interrogations is has not only perhaps always been what produces possibility, what clears our space for what else is possible. But that has been key to birthing new life. And that has been key to birthing, and really like through a laborious process, us taking part of building the world that we want, building the world that we know we can, hear breathing, and continuing to being committed to a future that our ancestors did not see, and even though we may not see, that we still believe in.
What Baby Suggs in the Clearing and womanist theology has in common is the fact that it gives permission. In the Clearing and in Baby Suggs' sermon, she tells the people to love what yonder hates. And some might read this as a direct confrontation with inherited Christian theologies from colonial mindsets about God, about Jesus, about sin, and about self.
We've always been syncretistic. I think Black people particularly, our Pan-African, the people in the diaspora have always been syncretistic. But I think our species as well has always been syncretistic. There's no such thing as a pure anything, Christianity, whatever, right? And I will also say that syncretism has often been used as pejorative in a negative way when spoken about Black folks and Black religious people, right? So in terms of like Santeria or Candomblé or other kind of Afro Caribbean religions that extend from African spirituality, but in the same way that Catholicism has married some of those things with their ancestors, that we've done the same thing, but in those cases it's been called demonic or syncretistic, as if Catholicism was the pure expression of something.
And when we think about the legacies of Christian colonial enterprise, when we think of the way that hierarchies and assignments of beauty, assignments of intelligence were made according to the color of one's skin, and in accordance with inexplicable amounts of violence and collusion, we have to really be careful of having this notion of light and dark and this metaphor that doesn't take seriously whiteness and Blackness as an aesthetic scale and as a racialized scale in our world. And so we have to ask some questions about being washed white as snow. And the way that language and metaphor do not always remain the same, but also have to be resisted and reimagined and even reclaimed in the ways that affirm, if you're in some sort of Christian religious enterprise, in ways that affirm the dignity of all.
this is how we create new religious systems and concepts and ways of understanding. It happens first. We play with it first. And I think if Black folks and if we as a community and communities, plural, can continue to embrace what we've already been doing, but embrace it anew in the way that you're talking about, as this is the technology that has kept us and that helps us to continue to recreate our reality, then there's less shame associated with us making these moves. There's less the need to ask for permission. From who?
Katie Cannon, the mother of womanist theology, says even when they call your truth a lie, tell it anyway. Womanist theology teaches us that resurrection isn't always flashy and miracles don't always happen. Womanist theology gives us permission to look at the places that are hidden, forgotten, and obscured, because there are some realities that not even violence or the lies of yonder can capture. And that's where we're headed in our next episode. Because while it's true that there would be no womanism without Black Liberation Theology, and no liberation theology without the Black church, there would be no Black church without the roots that go even further back, to the trees. Join me and two more friends, world builder Naya Abernathy and Elder Leroy Barber, as we talk about the ways the clearing was a rendition of something much older, a place called the Hush Harbor.
Thank you for listening to Black Modern Mystic, as made by Dr. Mommy. Oh, and don't forget to support the show. Bye.